So the Nova series have been quite a favorite of ours ever since we first experienced the Nova 8. Now this is especially if you're considering what's the most value for money. Now while it had some faults, the Nova 9 that came right after showed very promising improvements, chipping away some megapixels in its main camera from a 64 megapixel to a 50 megapixel camera. It had great results, performing better in low light conditions and reduced some of that shutter lag. Now, but aside from its cameras, it was still missing a little of that Huawei magic seen in their flagships. So it got us thinking, could a Pro variant resolve all of these issues? Well, the guessing games are over. We have a Nova 10 Pro here with us today. Moving away from Kirin chipsets to Snapdragon dual autofocus front-facing cameras to that 50 megapixel main camera that feels reminiscent of the Nova 9. All wrapped up in this decent-looking frame, coming in at 2,599 ringgit or just under 900 Singapore dollars. But does it perform like a real pro, and is it worth a few extra bucks? I'm Melissa. Let's take another simplified deep dive in the Nova 10 Pro. Coming in this starry silver color we have with us, carrying the etched Nova symbol proudly at the bottom from previous designs, it's also textured differently from the frosted back. We must say, it's a nice touch. These golden accents surrounding the cameras have gotten some mixed reactions. Now some say it's a little ugly, while some race to get a closer look. So maybe it's just whether you have a thing for the color gold or you prefer something that makes less of a statement. We'll let you decide. But one thing's for sure, the module is far bigger than in the previous Nova 9 series and extends quite far out from the back, proudly stating AI triple camera surrounding it. Not surprising is how this would wobble when set on a table. If we're being honest, the overall aesthetics do look a little imbalanced because of it, especially with the dual front-facing camera cutouts of the OLED 6.78-inch curved display, which doesn't help clean up the look at the front either. As far as resolutions go, this still has a 429 ppi density, produces over 1 billion colors while supporting HDR10 with refresh rates up to 120Hz. Needless to say, it's still a great display for indulging in all of your online content with a 91.1% screen-to-body ratio, while 300Hz touch sampling rates should be a breeze to work with on those first-person shooter games. The stereo speakers, on the other hand, doesn't quite match up to the quality heard on the Mate 50 Pro, but it's still a better take than the mono speakers found on the Nova 9. Regardless of the differences, it still reaches up to 90 decibels and should serve as an immersive sound experience for most environments. Despite being labeled as a Pro, we were hoping it came with a faster chipset than a standard version, but it doesn't. You still get a 6nm Snapdragon 778G and Adreno 642L. Our Geekbench scores don't suggest high scores either, scoring 786 for single core and 2964 for multi-core. But it does manage a Vulkan Wildlife overall score of 2494 and averages 14.9 frames per second. After some rounds on Call of Duty, it did get a little warm to the touch and really started showing a rise in temperature when put through a wildlife stress test, showing a 10 degrees Celsius increase and battery depletion of 6%. Nothing too drastic from a technical standpoint, but does suggest thirsty power consumption when graphics are at full blast. The forefront of almost every smartphone nowadays have been about cameras, especially if it's a Pro. Now you'd hear everything from fancy image computation jargon to variable zoom lengths like 100 times periscope, or in some phones, variable aperture sizes such as the one on the very recent Mate 50 Pro. So, where does this stack up? Well, for one, the main camera is still a 50 megapixel, but coming at an ever so slightly tighter angle of 27mm and a slightly wider aperture of f1.8 rather than the 23mm and f1.9 found in the previous Nova 9. It is accompanied by an 8 megapixel ultra wide and a 2 megapixel depth sensor. Image computations happen quite strongly right after snapping a photo, as Huawei's rebranded XMage image engine seems to be pulling a lot of the weight when it comes to correcting highlights, sharpness, detail, and even lens distortions for the wider 50 megapixel. Thanks to this, on the right occasion, photos at 0.5 to 2x comes out great. While the Mate 50 Pro had similar characteristics, this phone wasn't quite given the same chipset performance, so it does feel a tad bit slower. As long as you're patient enough before reviewing a photo, you'll like these cameras. Quality over quantity, right? Exposure consistency of the 8-megapixel telephoto for the most part does require more attention by tapping to focus, but it's still a close match to the main camera. Colors might not hit the mark sometimes, but it's not a make or break situation, retaining most of its sharpness. Nighttime images do pretty well too, showing little to no noise and balances shadows quite nicely. But of course, not forgetting the key feature that separates the Nova 10 Pro from its standard version is the dual front-facing 60-megapixel and 8-megapixel cameras. The 60-megapixel is definitely sharp, alright. If counting facial hairs or spotting boogers is your thing, then yes, this would be a reasonable tool for your needs. Not that we're judging if you do. Video quality though, topping at 4K at 30 frames per second does seem to suffer a little more when having backlit subjects and tends to be more saturated than it does in photos. Color balance and dynamic range are great for daytime use, but would ultimately get noisy in low light conditions. Overall, it's nowhere near bad, but it's not exactly much of an improvement in its video department from previous iterations, showing quite mediocre results. Maybe this is something Huawei could invest more into, considering how well they've done this far when it comes to taking photos. Battery life got us about a day and a half of use with its 4500 mAh battery and comes with a 100-watt supercharger which gets you from 20 to 80% in under 10 minutes. The Nova 10 Pro comes with 8GB of RAM, 256GB of storage and is priced at 2,599 ringgit. Just for context, the standard Nova 10 comes at 2,199 ringgit. While the price difference isn't too far off, you do get a bigger screen, an extra camera at the front, a slightly bigger battery, and also the 100-watt fast charger. To be frank, it's quite similar to the standard version, and we expected more of a secret sauce in this Pro variant. In truth, it's kind of just a bigger Nova 10. But we can't take away how the Nova series is still a great mid-range option, minusing the SE, because we really don't find much special about the SE despite it being called Special Edition. Prove us wrong, Huawei. But all in all, Huawei has made bigger improvements before and it just feels a little bit of a copy-paste and make it bigger situation here and playing it safe. Now, innovation can be a slippery slope with big risks but also big rewards. So in this Nova 10 Pro, maybe Huawei is just glad to find their footing before the mayhem starts all over again.